Okay, everyone, I want to talk about films that almost made my top 10 in the year 2020. So here's my honorable mention list. Let's go with Kajillionaire. That's my first film. It stars Evan Rachel Wood, who was, a bit bigger in the 2000s, but she's still out there. She's still alive, and if someone puts her in a film, she'll probably say yes. So that's what happened here. And her parents are Richard Jenkins, the two-time Oscar-nominated character actor, and Deborah Winger, who is like a very rarely in the movies, but when she's in the movies, it's a big deal. She's pretty awesome, and fun fact, I once rented a house from a rabbi who took acting lessons from her. Anyway, I guess I'm 2 degrees removed from Deborah Winger. And Gina Rodriguez is in it, and this movie is about a 28-year-old woman who is stunted extremely because her parents just kind of suck. Like, they're awful. They're con artists, so, they're not, they don't, believe in, doing legal, lawful things, but more than that, they just really don't know how to go about life. They live in an office building in a commercial office, and it's interrupted by paint. Their daily life is they were woken up because it's a dilapidated office building and paint comes up, but they still pay rent, and then they run past the landlord every morning before he gets them to ask about paying rent, and then they pull off, which doesn't make sense now that I'm saying the plot of this movie out loud. But I'm not recommending this movie on the basis of plot cohesion. If anything, it might be more like Mystery Science Theater 3000, a candidate. But I don't think you would laugh at it, because I think it's tonally very congruent, and I like that. And Evan Rachel Wood creates a character that's really one of the very best. I think she's my second or third favorite performance of the entire year. She captures young adult stagnation extremely well, and she has some very interesting tics that might put her on some ambiguous mental disorder trope. What's weird is that not the only thing that's weird, but what's also interesting is that the trio meets Gina Rodriguez on a flight, which they're trying to pull an airline miles scam, and Gina Rodriguez somehow enters their life for reasons that don't entirely make sense, because she's got a job, and she's like, yeah, I want to con with you guys, and then she suddenly takes Evan Rachel Wood kind of into her life when Evan Rachel Wood was like, my parents don't love me, doesn't anyone love me, and I'll pay $1,000 to anyone who loves me, and Gina Rodriguez takes the $1,000 and whisks her off into her apartment. And yeah, this actually happens. This is an actual movie you can see, and it's a really good movie. I'm putting this as one of my favorite movies of the year because it works, but it's bizarre how it works. And there's also a spoiler alert. There's also a lesbian moment, and I'm feeling that. That was a problem I had with the movie, because I felt like it wasn't very organic. I felt like they just felt like this is a very indie movie. Let's throw in a lesbian movie in there just to get the attention of the GLAAD Awards. So, my goal was to do about 2 minutes, fast takes, and I talked too much about this movie. But, also it's directed by a woman, auteur. Her films are really good, so I don't remember her name, but I definitely want people to, because some people are not enough women directors, so, watch her films. I also really like The Dig, which is interesting because I often don't love period pieces, British period pieces. I like period pieces, but the British period pieces, they can be stuffy. Not like The Favorite, the 2018 film, but, some films. And this film, formulaically, it was it would have been stuffy, but there's a certain delicacy to the film. It stars Ralph Fiennes, who loves those stuffy. He's the king of stuffy period films, even though he's an amazing actor. But he was in The Reader or whatever. But and he was in The Duchess too, wasn't he? Anyway, and Ralph Fiennes is amazing in it. He's a working class stiff, and it's not just a historic film, but it's a film about preserving history, which is something that I've never put much thought into it. And the film's biggest challenge is making people care about archaeology done right. I think the general public likes the idea of preserving things, but they kind of probably don't think it's more important than a war because this is happening on the eve of World War II, or that like being done really, really well. Like you have an old ship that's like 1,000 years old. Like, yeah, just do whatever you got to do with it. Like, I don't know if the audience is on board or emotionally invested in the idea of archaeology done well. What we're more invested in is the classist struggle, where this archaeologist played by Ralph Fiennes is going to be brushed aside by these established aristocracy of archaeology, and that is kind of fascinating. The film has a really great underlying kind of class struggle, but it's also, there's just a serenity to it. I mean, part of it is reflected in the beautiful cinematography, but it's just a sort of very balanced look at life and the characters, and I think perhaps that what might attract people to this sort of like flowery Downton Abbey kind of Victorian era period pieces. I think the properness and the care that people put into maybe their appearance and their manners, and you see it a little bit on display here, but you also see a little bit of the wild side, the people trying to find comfort against a culture of repression, and I really enjoyed Dig for that. I also really enjoyed Nomadland, of course. It won the Best Picture. It reminds me of the Sean Baker films, The Florida Project and Tangerine. It's not narrative-based, it's slice-of-life-based. It's almost as much documentary-based as you could possibly make and still call it a fictional film. The imposition of two great characters, the one that's played by Frances McDormand and David Strathairn, against people who didn't even act or get cast, is quite an achievement. I'm not going to give too much credit for the photography because I feel like I don't think the film itself wanted the photography to be distracting, whereas in The Dig, the photography was part of the statement of the film. Uncle Frank was a film that was a little bit formulaic. It's an indie film through and through. But again, as I said with Palm Springs, I think the emotional moments spoke to me. I think I like films, I like societal movements that encourage people to come together rather than people to take sides on issues. And I think Uncle Frank had it had a couple Bible Belt thumpers and a gay person who fought repression in his youth, all in the same family, and everyone else was somewhere in between, and the mystery is where those people would fall. And there was a reviewer who I think he should stop reviewing films if he's so hateful, being like, oh my god, these people should be thrown up and locked up forever thinking anything negative of their gay relative. And I'm not like that. That's not the kind of film that I want to see, and that's why Uncle Frank resonated those notes. But it was more than that. I think it's not just that it resonated those notes, it really resonated those notes well. It's not just that any plot that will check those boxes is going to produce that emotional response in me. It was done well. There's also Borat, which I thought was a very... I mean, if they dialed back the grossness 10%, I would be so much more on board. But this was a film... I admire it most as a sequel that had to reinvent itself, that had to reinvent the wheel, that had to change the narrative of who Sacha Baron Cohen and who Borat represents, and that even involved PR with Sacha Baron Cohen himself. The press tour for Borat 2 was very different than the press tour for Borat 1 because Sacha Baron Cohen had to be much more visible as himself rather than his character, not as a playful jester, but as a person with very concrete views on free speech, hate speech, tolerance, the disaster that is Trumpism and the Tea Partyism in America. And there was more of that. And there was also more of manufactured narrative without bystanders in the sequel, because there were elements of non-consensual acting, a non-consensual comedy that can be distasteful unless you're doing it with truly awful people, which is what they tried to limit it to. So I think Borat 2 was just a massive improvement. Really briefly, I also was a sucker for Eurovision. I've been to Iceland a lot. This was one of the more realistic portrayals of Iceland. I mean, you might have the Mighty Ducks, or there was a recent Saturday Night Live sketch that was just bizarre. So, and it was very earnest, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was, how can I say, excellent? Or Bill and Ted Face the Music, sorry. Definitely, again, when you make a sequel, I tend to admire things that have to fit the narrative to where the sequel needs to be. In this case, the characters grew up, the actors are older, we needed an element of surprise. We knew that this was a sequel where we knew things already happened, so the characters are older. I repeated the characters are over, but I'm 11 minutes in this video, and I am not doing a retake, so you'll have to live with that. There's even the death of George Carlin you have to work around, so you cast the brilliant Holland Taylor instead, and you just have the theme of descendants everywhere with Kristen Schaal. But, again, you're working with the irony of, I believe it's called dramatic irony, where something's going to happen. We know that a song is made to change the world. So we also have another obstacle is that you have to have the kind of time traveler elements of science fiction that are being explored at an extremely shallow level. You're not putting any thought into time travel, but time travel's there. So time travel is happening again, interacting with famous people throughout history, interacting in the depths of hell and heaven, elements of those first ones, and you have to recreate it, but you have to do something new with it. And that's what we call a good sequel. Lastly, Project Power is a film that you run out of patience for superhero films, but again, this isn't about superheroes, it's about people with temporary superpowers. So that's a new way to explore, say, the genre. It's a new way to explore action. It's also a new way to, in this case, this is another Joseph Gordon-Levitt film. Joseph Gordon-Levitt had a great year. This is also a case to explore sort of the military-industrial complex, to satirize it through an action film. And also has Dominic Fishback in the breakout role, and it's I thought it might have had the best photography of the year. It was, action films, you have liberty to create, visual spectacle and not have it as if you're showing off. So that's what I would have as honorable mention this year. That's some great stuff. All right. I've had so much fun talking about this, and now I'm going to have a drink of water because my throat is hoarse and I've had several takes. All right. Bye-bye.